I'm Rob Falconer. I'm an independent pharma consultant, mostly for the little guy. And Larry had his usual fun with me, as it turns out, by assigning me a more or less impossible job with this title, which is yeah, in 30 minutes or less. So in the first instance, as I said to some people at lunch, that's sort of a unicorn. I don't know anybody who knows how to find that unicorn reliably. All I can talk about is many years of experience in the forest where you might find that unicorn. It's become very, very difficult in the generic side of the pharma industry to make money. And what I'm going to try and do is sketch the major factors that go into the cost and the return on investment, as I understand it, for the generic field as we know it. And so there's 5 big pieces of that story that all relate to cost as well as time and return on investment. The first one I'll tell you about is the sort of scientific technical stuff. So at the beginning of life cycle, there's a number of smart decisions you have to make right to begin with if you hope to make profits. Poor product selection, poor product development will never lead to a return on investment that anybody is going to like. Another piece, which is increasingly difficult, and if Mike Strazella was around, I'd love to hear, at least on the sideboard, some more comments about that, which is the legal piece of generic drugs, which is a very deep question and is also associated with an awful lot of pre-marketing costs, really big costs depending on what you're trying for. Another major piece of it is simply either within your own organization as a generic supplier or by contract, you have to have the services of somebody that honestly understands what is an abbreviated new drug application, who's going to submit it, and how do you know it's likely to get approved. This has a very important indirect cost impact because the ultimate failure of return on investment is you never get the approval letter. That's the ultimate failure of return on investment. And then the other 2 things, which are often the first things that come up when people want to know how do I make profit on something like a generic, is people usually jump to, well, I have to have low-cost ingredients and a low-cost producer. That's like the heart and soul of making sure I'll make profits, right? And it's, of course, very important. But these 5 different factors all have to be optimized to find that unicorn. So on the first thing, which is the science and technical stuff, and I'll obviously have to go fast, the first thing is you have to have a decent formulation, whether it's in your own house or you hire somebody else to do it. That formulation, at the very outset of your thinking about, I want to market this product, it has to perform, and it has to show stability. And it's not something you can figure out in 3 months after you had the idea. It takes several months just to confirm that you've got something that you might seek approval for. And in that process, you're filing, you're exchanging contractual documents, memorandums of understanding, or whatever, with somebody who's going to put that thing together for you, and you have to be smart about how you do that. So the easiest thing is to pick something where there's no patents, and you won't have to have any of the legal piece, which is a tremendous piece, because there is no patent or the patent expired a long time ago. Problem is, you're going to have 30 different competitors out there seeking the same FDA approval for that easy-to-file thing, for the most part. So this would be things like immediate release oral products and tablets, capsules, solutions, the obvious things. So the next strategy, still at the outset, when you're still deciding what do I even want to do, you could go for harder things to formulate, modified release, dosage forms, and there are metrics that go with this. Which of these things is the laser pointer? The one in the middle. Okay. So right off the bat, you can put some, these are scientific wild ass guesses, okay? Let's admit that right up front. The easier cost, when you're not even chasing a patent, you might get the whole darn thing put together and submitted for maybe $250,000, something like that. Not high finance necessarily. On the other hand, it's an immediate release tablet, and almost anybody in the world can figure that one out, just like you are. So you only have maybe $250,000 in that thing. The harder ones, which would be an extended release something, or a something that requires sophisticated manufacturing other than just a standard tablet or capsule, that might cost you $500,000 to $5 million, because it's much more difficult to do, and you'll be competing with maybe 15 or less competitors on the world pharmaceutical stage to get your approval letter. So, you've gone up by quite a factor right there, and you have to make these choices very intelligently to understand how much money you're putting down for what you expect to get. These would be harder, higher cost strategies. So you've got different formulations. Bioequivalence, blood levels are harder to match with some of these things. Might cost you more, but on the other hand, not everybody can prove it. You might have harder physical manufacturing challenges. For example, you might aim for sterile products, suspensions, emulsions, nasal sprays, soft gels, transdermals, things that not every factory out there in the world, in India, China, or anybody else, is able to do. So that's a better strategy. It's going to cost a little more. You're going to have a few less competitors. Okay? Nowadays, another element that goes in before you ever get your chance to the market is the development that you slaved over here, whatever the product is, has to be done according to something FDA calls quality by design. Quality by design, which is a very organized scientific method for proving that the reason you designed your product and your process the way you did is justified at every stage. Why did you use these ingredients and not other ingredients? Why did you make the dimensions of it this way and not some other way? How did you decide that when you run your machinery this way, it's reliable and it will make it that way every time, and it's not near what's called a failure mode, where you could have bad batches because you designed the process poorly? And all of that has to be submitted to the FDA in your marketing application. It's not background data. There's a big fat thing called a product development report that you have to send into FDA that justifies all of this. And if it's poorly written, they refuse to approve your application. This is an element that was treated very softly about 10 years ago by FDA, even though it was enshrined in international standards like the so-called ICH, some of you may know about that. But in the last 5 years or so, FDA has hardened up their compliance requirements for this QBD, quality by design stuff. If you don't document it properly, you actually may not get any approval. So you have to be smart about that. And then the bioequivalence studies are not automatic. Just because there's some CRO with a lot of credentials doesn't mean that your blood level is going to match that of your chosen, reference product. And this scales with the difficulty of the formulation. Sometimes you have to do a bio study 3 times to match that blood level. Right. The ANDA process itself, the important thing about it is you have to have a good manufacturer. Mr. Harris, I think, is going to have something to say about that. We were talking at lunch about what's most important to a major buyer. And probably the most important thing is you can actually supply. That's the big one. And that goes back to both capability and a clean FDA record. Having a problem with FDA on the API supplier or the finished dose manufacturer for your ANDA is a terrible problem to have. Talk about cost. That's going to cost you a lot. You have to have somebody who really understands what FDA needs to file this ANDA. Don't just have some smart in-house people that used to work for somebody and they de novo try to learn how to do ANDAs. You'll need software. You'll need to meet FDA standards, blah, blah, blah. Go find somebody who knows not only generally how to do it, but even knows all about the software. You probably, if you're going to do it in-house, you probably need 3 or 4 of those people to realistically say we're doing ANDAs in-house. It's very wise, as with many other things we've heard, to go out and contract out somebody who does this every day. They've got the software, they've got the experts, they've got a confidential firewall. They'll take all your documents, they'll load them into the thing which becomes the electronic common technical document, the ECTD. They'll send it to FDA, and God willing, and the creek don't rise, you'll get an approval on it. But you got to have a smart regulatory team, and you got to think about this before you go down that track. Talk about costs. Look at the FDA schedule for various fees that are associated for the humble little generic firms to do their minor little generic products. There's something called an ANDA program fee. If you're a little company with less than 6 ANDAs submitted, it's $166,000 every year to be in this game. Even though you're not getting an approval letter, you've got things being reviewed, you're paying $166,000 this year, the budget will go up, it'll probably be $170,000 next year, $180-something thousand after that, etc. And it generally takes around 30 months to get an approval. You can be lucky and get an approval in 20 months, or you can be unlucky and it takes 48 months. But you're still going to be paying every year this little fee. If you're a medium-sized firm, FDA has a peculiar definition, 6 to 19 ANDAs submitted. You have to pay every year $664,000 every year for the bounty of having things under review at the FDA, whether you've got approvals or not. And if you're what they call a large firm, 20 ANDAs or more submitted, every year you got to pay $1.66 million each year for the program fee, just to have the honor of being in the program. Talk about a cost. Unrelated to API, unrelated to your manufacturer, but boy, what a cost. Then, for each time you actually submit, those were so-called program fees. Then if you actually submit an ANDA, each time you do that for fiscal 2019-2020, you got to pay $179,000 with your ANDA. If FDA says there's something wrong with your submission, and they send it back, say, fix this, we can't review it, you lose half that fee, no matter what else happens. So you lose half of $179,000 if there's anything fundamentally wrong and you have to resubmit. Then, hopefully, there's all kinds of other fees. I won't belabor. You know, a few hundred, 100 here, 100,000 there. After a while, you're talking real money, as Senator Proxmire used to say. Once you get into the review cycle, it's all about the quality of that ANDA, which goes all the way back to, was it a good formulation? Did you have good data? Did you have a good regulatory team? Did documents read well? Are they formatted easily? Are the hyperlinks to all the data, which is oftentimes, there's bio-studies involved, it's the equivalent of 1,000 to 2,000 pages of hard copy. But this reviewer, these reviewers at FDA are clicking around hyperlinks, looking at all this stuff. So you usually get one big fat deficiency letter, normally. And they call it major because it means substantial FDA resources will be required for you to answer the list of questions under a major response letter from FDA. Kind of standard, everybody expects it. It's very rare not to get at least one major complete response letter with several points that might take a lot of work and time for you to fix and then respond. That's what FDA calls major. There are also minor deficiency letters, which hopefully you can cure in just a few weeks or months, and it won't cost that much. You just don't want more than one major complete response letter from the FDA. If you get more than one, you're really ruining your ROI, because it'll probably take an extra year for every 6 to 12 months minimum for every major deficiency letter that you get. So you don't want more than one. One is de rigueur, it's standard. Everybody gets them, almost everybody. And there's these things called information requests. The least little level 3 thing that FDA can ask you about the problems with your ANDA, it's called an information request. Let's say there's these 2 pieces of information we can't find. Can you please supply them? You have only 7 days to give me an answer to that. 7 days. So if they're saying, we need your product to have a multi-tier dissolution profile study different from the one you originally submitted, please, you've got 7 days to organize a pretty complicated bunch of laboratory work. Pretty hard to do. So you have to be prepared as much as you can to answer those little ones in 7 days to avoid getting a major deficiency letter. This is how they play the game. Oh, a couple of other things about that. Everybody knows about the backlog. FDA has been saying for many months now that there's not much of a backlog anymore. The esteemed Bob Pollack, industry expert on generics from the Lockman Group, formerly with Lockman Group, now he's, I think, an expert consultant with them or advisor to them. He observed several months ago that FDA is increasing the rate at which they approve ANDAs. Unfortunately, the number of ANDAs coming in the top of the system is still more or not much different from the number coming out of the system. So there's still this buffer of thousands of applications that aren't approved yet. 10 years ago, we used to submit ANDAs with the hope that we could get an approval in 18 months or less. The current statistics are somewhere between 23 and 32 months, even despite lots of improvements that the FDA has made. It used to be 40 months, so they've made some progress. But 23 to 32 months is still 23 to 32 months. You don't go through all of this for like 4 years, make a submission, and then think you're getting approval a year later. Not going to happen. FDA is making a lot of progress on this, but the disappearance of the backlog in general, it's going to take a few more years to really get down to maybe people can expect an 18-month approval or something like that. So then there's the more traditional idea about how to keep the costs down, et cetera. And that's efficiency and it's compliance. Efficiency, I'll come to that second. The compliance piece is actually getting to be a huge piece. That goes back to Mr. Harris's comment, what good is the contract I have with you if you can't actually make the product for me on time and in the quantities that I actually want? That partly revolves around not having any problems with the FDA, with your suppliers. Right? Another factor is make sure if you're going to go on the line and say, I'm going to make that product, I'm going to sell it to one of the big buyers. Make sure that you get quality assurance audits both before your ANDA is submitted, so that you know all the batch data is really good, and after the ANDA is submitted, but before approval. Because one last step that a lot of companies will have is the ANDA is cooking, you got one big letter, you answered it, now everybody's expecting it to get approved within, less than a year. But then FDA does something that's called a pre-approval inspection at the manufacturing site that's making this product, whether it's yours or a contract. That pre-approval inspection can be a real nightmare if the people locally running the factory aren't really tight on following good manufacturing practice. I was, a month ago, in the presence of an FDA inspection on behalf of a client, where we've been working on their quality system diligently, but a lot of the products FDA was inspecting had been made 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So FDA said, we don't care about your current quality system. We're judging everything on the quality system you had 4 years ago when you made these batches and put them in the ANDA. And they wrote them an extremely long set of criticisms about those products. So there's also that to be considered. The FDA has a very long reach. This particular inspection that I was present for was in a faraway part of Asia. The FDA is getting much better at reaching all the places that make APIs or finished products. So another thing, after many years, be careful signing a contract with this is the first ANDA I've ever done, manufacturer. It's unfair from an entrepreneurial standpoint to say, I really don't want to do an ANDA with you because you haven't done one yet. And they're like, well, somebody has to do one with us, otherwise how will we ever get in the game? And at this, with all the complications I just described, my attitude towards that is, sorry, I'm not your savior. I need somebody with a track record, if at all possible. Because a first manufacturer doesn't even know what they don't know. Another favorite old saw. Somebody says, I want to submit an ANDA. We haven't got an FDA approval before, but we've gotten several approvals in the European Union. And they use the electronic common technical document just like the FDA. So we'll just take our European CTD, flip it over into an ANDA, and ship that in there, and everything's going to be good, right? We'll have a whole portfolio of European approvals. Beware. Beware. Because there are a lot of differences between the way the FDA reviews dossiers versus the way the Europeans review dossiers. In Europe, they're bound by law to accept the opinion of a so-called qualified person in the factory for all kinds of quality judgments, by law. So a European inspector goes into a European factory, they stop asking questions when they run into a formal document that says the qualified person in this factory under European law has said this is okay. FDA couldn't care less about that. FDA, it's an old song I've mentioned to a few of you. FDA's credo is, we're all Americans, just like our money, in God we trust. Everyone else bring data. You have to show the data, no matter where you made the product, to an FDA inspector. They don't care what the title of the people that signed the report is. Couldn't care less. They want to see the data behind the report. The big difference between European dossiers in that regard and US dossiers. Another concrete example, European dossiers require a summary of the manufacturing process approved by a qualified person. They don't require the full batch record to be submitted for review. FDA looks at every page of all of European FDA batch records. Believe me, lots of questions come out of that review. Not a small difference. Then there's, of course, efficiencies. I'm almost out of time, but when you get to working with your manufacturing site, whether it's by contract or internally, especially if it's by contract, you have to have smart contracts, right? Base your supply contract, which is probably signed 2 or 3 years before there's ever an FDA approval. You might have an MOU to start the project, but a contract doesn't get signed until a year or 2 later. Base it on a real-world selling price. Well, how do you do that if it takes 3 years to get an approval? What kind of a Svengali are you supposed to be to sit with your crystal ball this year and say, I know what that bottle is going to cost 3 years from now in the U.S. market? Very difficult. So try to have a smart contract. Try to agree with your supplier that you can update the cost price even while the ANDA is under review. Why? All kinds of critical events will happen in the real-world market while your ANDA is under review. Somebody else might get a fast approval. Some other competitors might go out of the market. 10 other competitors might come into the market. You don't know that 3 years before. You do know that in the last year while your ANDA is under review. So stay in touch with your market. Adjust prices as often as you can justify. It's better to have staged pricing, flexible contract, than somebody throwing a dart on a wall and saying, here's the price I'll sell it to you for. I guarantee it. 3 or 4 years later, the supergroup buyer is like, that's 5 times the price I would ever buy it from you for. Forget it. And your manufacturer is like, no, you have to honor my contract to give me that many dollars per bottle. Never going to work. You need a flexible, strategic approach, and your manufacturers have to understand that and be in the boat with you to deal with that. Beware of overcapacity claims. Somebody might be doing a very nice job with your attempt to get an FDA approval, but they also did it with 6 other people. 2 or 3 of them got their approval before you on different products. By the time yours comes approvable, they don't have any capacity left in their factory. What are you going to do about that? It's a big deal switching manufacturing sites or convincing a primary manufacturer to put you ahead of somebody else that has a much more lucrative product. So you have to be aware of capacity too. You need intelligent guidance in their factory before you get to approval to talk about, are they going to be capable of supplying that much on day one? And then the generic business, it's all about day one. The day the approval comes, or within 24 hours of it, you need to be shipping. If there's any problem with that, you're not going to get your ROI. If you're 2 days late, 5 other competitors will have shipped to all the major things, and not you, and you're never going to catch that market share. At least not in the short term. The biggest buyers have these nice things called failure to supply penalties. Your first round of shipments, perfectly timed on day one, they go out to all kinds of people and everybody's happy. 9 months later, there was a glitch in the supply chain. The forecast was wrong. You need 40% more than you ever thought you needed, right? And there's a little clause that you sign with a major, major buyer that says, if you fail to supply my product for more than X period of time, and at most just a little bit more time to remedy that breach, I'm going to buy your generic product at the brand price and charge you that price. This can put a generic company literally out of business. There's a cost to consider. Smart scale-up and process validation is actually quite important. You want to make sure, whether your projectors work or not, you want to make sure that your manufacturing source has scaled and validated, which is a big subject for FDA, the right scale of product to meet your forecast. If the forecast is you need 30 million tablets a year, and your approved batch size is 200,000, that's not good. Because every time you make 200,000, you're going to have all of the quality control costs associated with that tiny little batch. Add that up over a year, you're not competitive. You're going to lose 25, 30, 50 cents, $1 on every single bottle you sell to avoid those failure supply contracts. So, there's a lot of cost factors in the big game compared to just material costs and the cost of producing a product. That's the primary manufacturing piece. And then hopefully nearer to the heart of a lot of the folks here is the distribution piece, the last piece. Inefficient, ineffective, or bungled distribution is just as dangerous as having trouble making the original bottle or product, right? So you have to be particularly careful about foreign suppliers. Note to all of us, probably 60, 70% of all prescription drug products in the United States, either the API or the finished product comes from overseas, comes from another country. Among the complications that go with that is, for example, is the finished dose site overseas totally up to speed on temperature monitoring of the shipment? Does the people at your 3PL or your own warehouse understand to get all the temp-tail devices out of each shipment? And who do they go back to? And who analyzes that data? And be very careful if your ANDA said you were doing that. And somehow nobody stumbled on that point until the shipment actually arrived. And people are running around like crazy in the warehouse trying to figure out, what's a temp tail? Where's it supposed to be? And what do we do with it? Oh, we'll put them in a box. Now, where do they go? Who reads them? Is this a scientific exercise? Do we do it? We should. Somebody has to deal with these issues if you're dealing with an offshore supplier. Another important thing about offshore suppliers is you have to understand FDA's player program, the so-called pre-launch approval process. You're not getting an approval letter yet, but you can ask FDA for permission for a strictly defined quantity of your product before the approval letter to come to American shores. It has to go to a designated distribution center, and the precise amount that's coming in has to match your paperwork. You have to figure all that out before you have your approval letter. You have to know that you can handle that process. If you're handling one of the 60 or 70% of products that involves a foreign manufacturer. And then, applicable to everybody, and this audience is well familiar with that, are you sure, just before your approval letter and the first shipment comes, are you sure that somebody has validated your DSCSA, sterilization, trace and track system? Or did they get, as I discussed with Frank back there, did they get to the 95% level? And then they had a software glitch, and nobody has returned to that question, and next week your letter is supposed to come. Big problem. So you got to make sure you've nailed track and trace. Do you have quality agreement with your supplier? This is one of FDA's favorite 483 or warning letter observations. You don't have a written agreement on the technical quality front defining what to do when things go wrong, or when data needs to be exchanged on a certain plan to support the product. That's another thing. I think it's really important to keep top management fully aware of all of these things. Not just saying my regulatory guys said we get the approval next month, hot dog, we're going to the market. Keep them updated really frequently, to be honest. Because you don't want the letter to not come, or the letter to come and unable to ship. And at that moment, have to, for the first time, tell your CEO what the problem is. You know, keep them informed. Last thing I'll just say, communication is really important. I've been very educated this conference on the light speed improvements in communicating electronically up and down the supply chain. Very important. And yet there's a lot of companies that don't nail that. You know, they'll check with their supplier upstream or their customer downstream maybe once a week, maybe every 2 weeks, to have a substantive management-aware discussion of how we're doing. It's much more relevant to do it weekly, actually daily, sometimes hourly, with these new tools that we have.